thank you very much, Jim, for that introduction. And boy, it's great to be back in person with everyone. I know we've been meeting on Zoom with some regularity over the last couple of years. I've seen some of you for the virtual fly-in meetings that we have in our office. But it's great to be back in person and to see your entire faces. And just to be able to be together is important, to share ideas and to talk about some of the priorities and issues that we're experiencing here in New England, and certainly how they should influence our work in Washington. That's critically important. So I want to thank Jim and Larry for all their ongoing work here with the New England Council. Jim, congratulations on your recent appointment by the President to an important committee. I know you'll represent the people and families of New England quite well in that capacity. And I just want to thank everyone for being here and for the intellectual resources that you help provide for me in my role. Really hope we can continue to connect beyond today as we move forward. Jim mentioned that I'm in my second term, which kind of surprised me when he said it. It feels like it's been a lot longer than that. Given everything that we've experienced here, I came down into office during the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. We've seen lots of political turmoil in the United States, certainly since then. We've seen once-in-a-generation global pandemic that has totally upended and disrupted healthcare and our economy and our way of life. And I hope that we are on good footing moving forward here. Clearly, we are not going to get to zero COVID in this country. We have to find a way to manage and mitigate the risk that COVID-19 brings. And we do have to be prepared for the future. And I do think we need to take additional steps in Congress to be providing the investments and resources necessary to build the stockpiles of PPE and materials, to make sure that we've got the vaccines and tests ready to go, and to be able to well-resource our public health efforts to make sure that we're ready for any future surge. Because we've got to be moving forward. We've got to keep our businesses open. We have to keep our schools open. We have to get back to life as we knew it before this pandemic as much as we can. And I think that the federal government has to continue to play a role in ensuring that that happens. You know, it's been interesting over the last few weeks. It's very rare for international issues to be at top of mind for most folks in my district. But this is a moment in time where everyone is talking about the international situation. And, heading into this premeditated, senseless invasion of Ukraine by Vladimir Putin and the Russian forces, I got a lot of questions from the media about why Ukraine matters. And I think the American people have answered that question. No one's asking why Ukraine matters today, because the American people find the struggle of the Ukrainian people compelling. They want our government to be doing everything and more to ensure that the Ukrainian military is well-resourced to be able to repel the Russian forces. I think some of the announcements of late by the administration, the appropriations by Congress to the tune of about $14 billion that's going to go to humanitarian and defensive weapons is significant, but this is an inflection point in that struggle. And we've got to do everything we can to stand with Ukraine. We had this address last week that was really powerful, really not to Congress, but to the entire country and world by President Zelensky. And he asked for a range of things. And I think we've got to continue to look for ways to be doing more. This is really not just about the struggle for Ukrainian independence. It's about the struggle of the free world versus authoritarianism and tyranny. And the American people know what side they're on, and our government has to show that with every possible resource that we can make available. So Jim mentioned some of the successes of this Congress, and I think the bipartisan infrastructure bill is something that we should all feel good about, that we were able to get across the finish line. Being a member of the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee, I think I addressed this group probably 4 or 5 times over the last few years, talking about the prospect of getting infrastructure done. And finally, we've arrived at the moment where the bill is being implemented and we're seeing the resources begin to flow down to the state and community level. I was just up in the town of Sandwich earlier this week. They're getting funding to do 100% high-speed broadband in their community. In fact, trucks are already out there stringing the wires and putting in the technology that they need to deliver broadband to a community that didn't have it. And actually, the woman who had chaired the local broadband committee that we worked with to provide the grant funding was so thrilled. She's looking for Netflix recommendations. If anyone has that. Let the town of Sandwich know that they haven't seen Tiger King or anything like that. So they want to know what's out there. But look, this is a must-have. This is not a luxury anymore. And in the 21st century, we've got to ensure that all of our businesses, all of our homes can connect not just to entertainment services, but to government services, to telehealth visits and healthcare, to education, and to be able to participate fully in the economy is really important. So there's been significant resources that have come to New Hampshire through the American Rescue Plan. On top of that, through the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and we're going to take additional steps to make sure that all of our communities have the help that they need to be able to implement high-speed broadband. It is just a must. Some of the other provisions in that bill are really significant for our state. We're going to see a 47% increase in the amount of money coming to roads and bridges in New Hampshire. I mean, obviously, this is a point in time where we're seeing construction costs increase a great deal, but the funding increase that we're getting is a long time coming. We've seen flat funding from the federal level for too long. In fact, the federal share of infrastructure investment has decreased about 10% over the last decade. That means the state's either picking up the tab or those projects aren't getting done. So this increase is going to allow us to advance projects on our 10-year plan. It's going to provide significant additional resources for transit, biggest investment in Amtrak and rail service in our nation's history. Sounds like a casino over there. I thought someone hit a jackpot on the slots or something. No, but this bill is terrific for New Hampshire. One of the other areas I'll mention too is water infrastructure. And this has a connection to a number of issues in our communities. Being able to see the kind of housing investment and growth that we need, particularly in southern New Hampshire. It will also support our need to be able to deliver clean drinking water to our residents. We've got the issue of PFAS contamination, which is a significant issue and a health threat in a number of our communities. There's $10 billion in the bill that is earmarked for PFAS remediation. That's going to help a lot of our local water districts be able to create the kind of clean water infrastructure that they need. And with the wastewater and stormwater, it's going to allow us to make necessary upgrades and also deal with a changing climate and make sure that our infrastructure is resilient for the future. So I think there's a lot of good news in that infrastructure package. It's going to set us up for success for the future. It's a 5-year bill, so it's not like we're pushing a lot of money out in year one. This is going to allow our state and our communities to plan appropriately and I think take full advantage of the benefits of that legislation. Just 2 weeks ago now, we passed a significant government funding bill. It was the Omnibus Appropriations Bill. I know a lot of you were interested in that. It was quite late. Usually this, and that is important. We know that for a number of priorities that are contained in the budget, whether it's funding the military, giving our troops a pay increase, making sure that we're filling in the gaps with VA care and delivering quality health care to our veterans, we need to get the budget done on time. And so as this year's appropriations process kicks off, there continues to be a lot of economic challenges as we move forward. Right now, we are seeing record prices at the pump. We are seeing inflation that we haven't seen since the early 1980s. At the same time, we're seeing a job market that is stronger than any time during the last 40 years, and we're seeing economic growth that we also haven't seen since the early 1980s. But I think the economic headwinds are significant, and we've got to work to address those as best we can. A number of the steps that we have taken, especially through the infrastructure legislation, I think will help in the medium to long term unkink some of these supply chains that have been a significant issue. But there are additional steps that Congress needs to take, and I think we've got a good piece of legislation in this Make It in America Competes legislation that can really help. It contains a bill called the CHIPS Act, which is really important. A lot of the inflation that we're seeing is due to the automotive sector in this country. It's due to the lack of availability of things like semiconductors and microchips. And that's why making sure that more of these products are made in America, that our supply chains are onshore, is going to be important for the future. This bill will help us do that. It also provides significant investment in higher education, in apprenticeships, and making sure that we are not reliant on China or other nations of the world for the supplies that we need to gear our economy and to run our economy for the future. One of the other issues that we're thinking a lot about these days is the issue of public safety and how we can support our communities on that front. I've been going around the district over the last few months talking to a lot of my local police chiefs about their needs. they are seeing the same sort of workforce challenges that private businesses are experiencing. And so we need to give them some help to make sure that they can recruit and retain the officers that they need. And in addition to that, take the steps that they want to take to implement new technologies like body-worn cameras, to provide the kind of training that their officers need, to provide the mental health resources that our law enforcement officers and first responders need. So we've got legislation in the House that we're pushing to provide grants to small and medium-sized police departments. We're working on bipartisan fashion to get that approved. But I think that could go a long way to help filling in some of the gaps that our local police departments and fire departments are experiencing right now as we come out of this pandemic, dealing with a number of the challenges that we're seeing. So there is a lot on the agenda. I'm always of the mindset that we are stronger when we listen to one another, when we work together, when we share ideas, when we go through the deliberative process, and when we find compromises on issues big and small. And I think that, on my committee's infrastructure as well as the Veterans Affairs Committee, we're able to do that, I think, in a significant way. But I'm always looking for those opportunities. And I find that the more I listen to people around New Hampshire, the more that gives me the resolve I need to be able to go back to Washington and do some of this work and achieve some of these results that I think are really important for our state and our country. So thank you again to the New England Council for convening us here today. Jim, this is always a terrific time to be able to connect and answer some of your questions. So why don't we get right into the Q&A?
Okay, I just asked first couple of questions. Daylight savings. Sunshine Protection Act. Passed unanimous in the United States Senate. No debate. Unanimous. Unheard of. Your thoughts on what you're hearing from your colleagues? Slow it down, or this has some momentum?
Well, as a House guy, it's a little bit frustrating to see a bill like that without a hearing that just sort of goes through under unanimous consent when we've got dozens of other important pieces of legislation that have been jammed up in the Senate and haven't got the attention that it deserves. I think on that issue, look, there's some history here. This was tried in the early 1970s. There was a public backlash against it. You had some parts of the country where in the middle of the winter the sun wasn't coming up until after 9 o'clock. Kids at bus stops in the dark, people going to work in the dark. So, I think the system that we have right now is somewhat of a balance. We've moved the goalposts a little bit in terms of when we change the clocks. I think it deserves some further study. I don't know that we need to rubber stamp this just yet, and I think we need to get some more public opinion and some more engagement on the issue before we ultimately pass it.
And Build Back Better is pretty much dead, but at the same time there seems to be some interest, at least in the Senate, about the child tax credit might reemerge. Your thoughts on whether something like that will reemerge and how successful will both branches be on that?
Well, I think this is an important time to look for ways to ease the economic burden on working families. And the child tax credit did that very effectively. It put hard-earned money back into people's pockets. It was expanded over the last year. Those advance payments, I can tell you some of the stories I heard from constituents. People that repaired a car so that a husband could get back to work, sending their kids to summer camp. These were not extravagances. These were basic things that families were able to do to create a healthier environment for their kids and to be able to pay the bills. So I think, especially as we see inflation raging right now, high gas prices, I think reauthorizing this expanded child tax credit could be one way to ease that economic burden. So that's something that I'll continue to push. In addition to that, I think there's some components of the Build Back Better legislation that are critically important. First, climate change. We have to do something significant, and I think our window is closing on our ability to be able to really impact and stave off the worst impacts from climate change. And the tax credits that were in the legislation was a negotiated compromise with Senator Manchin and others in the Senate. I think they found it acceptable where it was by the end. Would really unleash a renewable energy revolution that would not only create jobs and do some great things for our economy. We've got untapped resources in the Gulf of Maine here in New England that could help be unleashed through this legislation, but it's the responsible thing to do. I was just yesterday at a maple sugar operation in Hampstead, and and we were talking about how this is one of the shortest seasons they've ever seen. They're tapping the trees earlier, and the sap is not running as late as it used to. And that's been a trend over a lot of decades. I was up north earlier, one of the shortest ski seasons that they've seen in a lot of years. And so we can measure this in a lot of ways. It's having an adverse impact on our economy. We are, even in the state of New Hampshire, it's tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars annually that we are experiencing in costs due to these severe storms, due to sea level rise and floods. And that's due in large part to the man-made impacts from climate change. So that's something we've got to address. And the last thing I'll say is prescription drugs. We've got, 80–90% of people in this country that believe that we should be negotiating prices with drug companies, using the purchasing power of the American people, do it the same way the VA does. We should be working to cap out-of-pocket costs for things like insulin, and also costs for seniors on Medicare. Those are common sense things, and I think we can get that done in a bipartisan way. You've got some good action in the Senate right now. Senator Shaheen, Senator Collins working on a fix to cap the insulin prices, and I think if they can get that through, that'll definitely pass the House as well. So that's some exciting news. But we've got to deal with these things in component parts. I don't think you're going to see one big omnibus reconciliation bill.
Hassan wants to address the high cost of gasoline, and she wants to suspend the federal excise tax. Was it 18.4 cents on the gasoline? Your thoughts on whether this is get any momentum or any support?
I don't know that it has the momentum that it needs, but I'm supporting it. We're co-sponsoring the bill in the House. It's 18 cents, but that's 18 cents on the gallon, and we are seeing prices that we haven't seen either since 2008 or even well before that. One of the frustrations I have is that we've seen prices per barrel come down quite a bit since the news of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but yet we haven't seen the kind of relief that we should see at the pump based on those prices per barrel coming down. So I think we need additional oversight in terms of what these companies are charging, price gouging. I think there's an argument to be made there that's legitimate, but I do think that suspending the gas tax temporarily, but making sure that we're replenishing the Highway Trust Fund so that our infrastructure is not seeing disinvestment is a sensible policy to provide some relief.
Questions for the Congressman?
Hey, good morning,
Yeah.
Congressman Mackenzie Nicholson from the Alzheimer's Association. It's nice to see you. Thank you for being here. You talked a little bit about workforce earlier, and it's something that I'm really concerned about as our state continues to be one of the oldest states in the nation. We have 26,000 people right now living with Alzheimer's or dementia, and we're losing a huge proportion of our healthcare workforce to things like travel nursing, and they can go across the border and earn better wages. Can you talk a little bit about some policy initiatives that we could take to bolster that workforce and think about how we're going to continue to care for our older population as that Alzheimer's and dementia problem continues to grow?
Absolutely. And thank you for your work and your advocacy. I know I've connected a number of times with the organization. We've got some great advocates and family advocates here in New Hampshire. Folks sharing those personal stories really, I think, can help move us in the right direction in Washington. On the research front, making sure that we're providing additional appropriations to better understand Alzheimer's and dementia, and to make sure that when treatments are available, that they're affordable for individuals as well. But you talk about the caregiving aspect of this. This is so crucial for our state. I think we've got to look for ways to maximize the loan repayment programs that are available to make sure that we're getting the nurses and doctors and providers right here in New Hampshire, especially in underserved areas of our state. You think of northern New Hampshire and communities in rural parts of this country, they're experiencing a shortage that even outpaces some of what we see here in southern New Hampshire. So that's some of what we've been advocating for, but I think we do have a generational issue here in New Hampshire. We see that. We're an aging state. We're the second oldest state per capita in this country, and we've got to make sure we're making this an attractive place for young people to call home and start their careers. And I think we've got to look at the affordability issue. If you can't afford to go to college here, if you can't afford to find an apartment or a home here, then you're going to look somewhere else to put down roots and to start your family and to potentially practice and provide care for individuals who need it. We need those people here. So I think looking at making sure that we're providing the kind of investment for our university system, working on partnerships with the public and private sector to create pipelines into the workforce here, and making sure that we have the housing stock we need that is affordable is really important. There are a number of programs that I've been advocating to expand on the affordable housing front, but there's much more work to do there. So those are just a couple top line things that we're thinking about. But when it comes down to the family advocates that I've been meeting with on Alzheimer's and dementia, they provided some really powerful stories, and we want to do all we can to provide the kind of support for research that can help unlock treatments and support that these people are going to need. Thank you for raising that.
Other questions for the
Warren Congressman Chris Staywas. Could you talk a little bit about your ongoing efforts for the opioid crisis, not only here in New Hampshire, but across the country, and continuing funding for that to address it?
Sure. Well, and Chris, thank you for your work. We really appreciate all that you do, all that our EMTs and first responders do out in the community. This obviously has been an issue where I think New Hampshire was early to recognize the heroin and opioid crisis, and we've really been a national leader in helping to draw attention to this. And we know that this issue has not gone away, even though the addiction resources have increased over the last few years. We've got to make sure that people have coverage for mental health and addiction treatment and recovery services. That's critically important. But we also have to look at the issue of supply as well. And we're doing some work to make sure that we provide class-wide scheduling of fentanyl and analogs. We've done this on a temporary basis, but we've got a situation where the cartels can change the recipe of these really deadly fentanyl analogs and be one step ahead of law enforcement. So I've introduced a bipartisan bill to provide this kind of class-wide scheduling. I think that can help DEA and other law enforcement entities stay ahead and to be able to interdict this. We need more support at the border in terms of manpower as well as technology at checkpoints. We realized an increase in the last budget. We need to do more as we move forward because we know the cartels are getting ever more creative at finding ways to get this into the country. We also need to look upstream too at nations like China that have a role in the supply chain of these fentanyl components that get sent to Mexico. There's been some good work over the years, but more needs to be done there. And we need to do more with the Postal Service. We've seen a lot coming through the mail. We need to make sure the inspectors have the resources they need to be able to identify and interdict shipments that are coming right into our communities. So this is both a supply and demand issue. And as you measure this here in New Hampshire, we're continuing to see rates that are among the top 10 states per capita in terms of overdoses. And we've got to make every resource available to get people the treatment and the help that they need, and to make sure that people have coverage for the long-term care and recovery services that they're going to need to be able to manage this over time. But I thank you for all of your efforts. We'd love to continue to connect with you to hear how things are going out there.
Other questions for the Congressman?
Well,
Yes, sir.
I don't really have a question, but Congressman Dan Skowski from Rising Tide Associates. I just wanted to compliment your leadership, jumping in on the Competes Act, taking a leadership role for American manufacturers, having the courage to go and amend the bill, to perfect already really good provisions like the Homeland Procurement Reform Act. So thank you for your leadership there. I guess if I do have a question, it would be that, there's, November is coming, right? So Competes was a very big bill, that the House really had to put together a lot of work to move after infrastructure, right? And it was a second iteration of the bill. So between now and the summer, you mentioned things like the gas tax or daylight savings or whatever. What's it going to, is there a conference-wide sort of strategy moving into the summer as we pull away from COVID and there's a global conflict going on that sort of refocuses the conference and works down to members like you here in New Hampshire?
Well, I think on the Competes Act or the Make It in America Act, whatever we're calling it these days, it looks like we're going to go to a conference committee on it. I think the Senate is headed in that direction soon. So that's good news. I think everyone wants to figure out a way to get to yes here. And look, it's just going to have to come down to how we structure a compromise and how we get it across. But we can't take no for an answer here. This is too important for our country today and tomorrow for a number of the reasons that I mentioned, whether it's workforce development or semiconductor investment. But you hit on an issue that I think is critically important to stress, which is, as we entered this pandemic 2 years ago, we were woefully unprepared in terms of the supplies that we had to keep people safe, the PPE that we needed. And we've got to rebuild our manufacturing base here in the United States. That is a health issue, it's an economic issue, it's a national security issue too. And so I was pleased we were able to get provisions in that bill to require our government to source more materials from domestic manufacturers, including small businesses. I think that could help a lot of our businesses here in New Hampshire. But we really need a culture shift in this country about honoring manufacturing careers, about stressing and creating those pipelines of good skilled workers into our businesses here in New Hampshire and across the country. And I think that could help solve a number of problems as we move forward that have been exposed over the last few years. So thanks for drawing attention to that. I feel hopeful and optimistic that we will get something done. And I think most people in the House are of the mindset that we may not get everything we want in the bill, and certainly we won't get everything that was in the House bill. But I think it may look more like what the Senate has initially passed, and I think many in the House would be just fine with that.
We get, since the Congressman serves on the Veterans Committee, we have the General here, Jack Hammond, who runs the home base program. I know they're going to have a little conversation afterwards, but many of you should be aware of what home base is all about. It's an extraordinary program. They take care of the Iraqi, Afghanistan vets all over the country, and they're a role model for other agencies to adopt. But they've done an outstanding job. They're affiliated with the Boston Red Sox and Massachusetts General Hospital, and Harvard. I mean, they do extraordinary work for the warriors that come home. And I know he's here, and he's been a great supporter of the New England Council, as we are of home base. So the question from the General, Jack Hammond.
Congressman, first of all, thank you for your support for our veterans. One of the issues, a story was released last week that the suicides in the military, specifically the Army, have gone up 40% over the last 3 years. We know that's kind of a bell as an exempt from that. It's the same cohort groups that are transitioning, and frankly, once they leave the service, a lot of times they're more vulnerable to suicide because they lose that sense of identity, and there's so many other competing factors. Has there been any discussion on your Veterans Committee on how we can better engage the private sector to help connect with this? The big challenge the VA, in my conversations with them of late, and with Senator Lynch's Oversight Committee back in November, is the fact that we lose 20 veterans each day, and that could be a low number, but only 6 are in active care with the VA. The other 14 are in the private sector, and it only makes sense when our veterans leave the military and they go into the private sector and they work at BAE and other great places, they have great insurance. And so if they have a Blue Cross insurance, they have a primary care provider, and they're affiliated with a hospital system, they tend to stick with those, and they've done that since World War II. I think we've really run the course with the VA, and when I say that, on how we're evolving it over the past 18 years with no arguable improvement in the number of suicides we're getting, because frankly, 16 out of the 20 that die every day aren't being treated by the VA, and it's not the VA's fault. They're not going there because they're connected to other systems. I think we just need to take a look at how do we rearrange this where we work through the VA to have a solution somewhere, because we're continuing to lose all these warriors every day because they don't either access or have access to the VA care. And again, I know I went on more of a discussion than a question, but the question mark at the end of it is, are there any discussions looking at pivoting a little bit and looking at reimagining the way the VA delivers their care in partners?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I mean, you draw attention to an issue that is a crisis. It's 20 on average veterans, service members, members of the Guard and Reserve who die by suicide every day in this country. 20 each and every day. It's just an unfathomable statistic, and you're absolutely right. VA cannot solve this problem alone, and we've got terrific folks outside the VA umbrella that are leveraging resources at the community level, are working with veterans, and they should have the opportunity to be a part of that network. So legislation that we passed in the last Congress, the Roe Isaacson legislation, authorizes some partnerships with entities outside of VA. That was an important step forward. Obviously, we've got the community care model that has gotten off the ground. It had a rocky start with the Veterans Choice Program, now the Mission Act, but things are, I think, coming into focus with community care. But that should be, a vehicle and a model, I think, that we continue to work to perfect. And when it comes to mental health, we've got to make sure that it's not just VA doing this work, that there are a host of community partners that are empowered and engaged and are addressing this. It is a multifaceted problem. We've done a lot of work on the Transition Assistance Program. We've got legislation that looks at the disparities with the Guard and Reserve and looks to provide the same sort of discharge paperwork for members of the Guard that the DD-214s that members of the military get. That's one step, but providing that warm handoff and making sure that as folks leave the military, they understand what resources are out there for them, both through VA, but others in the community is really important to address this. And then there's the societal issue that we're all contending with, knowing the signs of mental illness, making sure that we're able to talk about it as a health issue, which it is. I think that is starting to change, but it can't change fast enough for so many of these heroes that are struggling and aren't getting the help that they need. So thanks for your service and your work. I look forward to continuing to chat with you a little bit more about that.
Maybe one final question? Joe Murray, Fidelity.
Congressman, just curious, in this day and age, how you, as someone who is a relatively quiet leader in terms of avoiding some of the noise and distractions that we're all exposed to politically these days, how you deal with that, and whether your opinion on Washington has changed in 4 years, if you could compare the Chris Pappas that was first elected and just given all that we've been through over the past several years, how you are working on keeping the focus on the issues away from the distractions.
Yeah. No, thanks for raising that. I mean, that's sort of the elephant in the room as we look at Washington. Most of the work gets done between the 20 and 80-yard lines. That's where most of the people in New Hampshire are politically, if you plotted them on a football field. And that's where you find the consensus you need to get compromises done, like the infrastructure legislation or the competes legislation. So I think that's where we've got to play, and I think the extreme voices all around that really tend to dominate the cable news cycle and social media. They don't speak for me, they don't speak for most people here in New Hampshire, and I think both parties need to do a better job of pushing that to the side. If we're going to have a functional democracy, we need at least 2 adult parties that are able to meet the moment and are able to come together and put the needs of the country first. And, I think we've got a lot of colleagues in Washington who are there for the right reasons. And we've got to do a better job of doing the hard work of getting to know one another, which can often open the door to partner on legislation that's really important for our districts. I'm always amazed when you talk to, people that I serve with from across the country, very different places from New Hampshire, just how much we have in common in terms of the feedback we're getting from our constituents. So whether it's on mental health and the drug crisis, or our small business issues and workforce shortages, there's a lot that's in common there that should provide us with all we need to get together on solutions. It doesn't always happen, and the system isn't always set up for that. We've got a lot of obstacles in the way. I frankly would like to see the Congress operate a lot more like the New Hampshire House or Senate in terms of its rules. Any member, Senator D'Alessandro, can bring a bill to the floor, get a vote in committee, and ultimately get a floor vote too. That doesn't happen in Washington, and we need more individual members who are empowered to be able to bring amendments, to offer legislation, and actually have a deliberative process. I think that we have gotten off track from what our founders intended. And there are a lot of ways that we can address that, legislation to, get money out of our political system. But I think rules changes that create an open dialogue and a fairer process is ultimately what we need if we're going to be able to reflect the will of the voters. And I think, the ability of the people here in New Hampshire to come together and forge solutions. We need to see more of that in Washington. So it's an ongoing struggle, and we've got to continue to work at it. But I enjoyed it and want to keep at it. So thanks, Joe, for the question.
Well, thank you, Congressman, and continued success and good luck in that session.